It was a bright, peaceful afternoon. The sun was high in the sky, lighting up the massive gates of a luxury mansion that stood like a fortress of wealth and power. The road outside was quiet, except for the soft sound of birds and the distant hum of city life. At the entrance, 2 security guards were on duty. They looked relaxed, almost bored. One leaned against the gate pillar while the other checked his phone, waiting for time to pass. For them, it was just another ordinary shift at an elite property where nothing ever really happened. Until someone walked in. A man appeared at the end of the long driveway. Slow steps. Calm posture. No security escort. No luxury car. Just a simple presence that didn't match the place at all. Steven Seagal. One of the guards straightened up slightly and squinted. "Hey, who is that?" he muttered. The other guard looked up and immediately smirked. "Probably another guy lost or trying to impress someone," he said casually. As the man came closer, his expression remained completely unchanged. No nervousness. No hesitation. Just calm confidence. The first guard raised his hand to stop him. "Sir," he said loudly, "this is private property. You can't just walk in here." The second guard chuckled. "Yeah, unless you're invited, turn around." The man stopped right at the edge of the gate. He didn't argue. He didn't look away. He simply said in a steady voice, "I'm here for my house." For a moment, there was silence. Then both guards burst into laughter. "Your house," one of them repeated. "Do you see where you are standing?" The second guard shook his head, smiling. People really say anything these days. The laughter echoed slightly in the open space, breaking the calm afternoon silence. But the man didn't react at all. Not a single change in expression. He just stood there, looking at the gate like he already knew what was behind it. The guards exchanged another amused glance, thinking the situation was already under control. One of them stepped closer, ready to dismiss him completely. But just before anything else could be said, the man slowly moved his hand toward his pocket. And everything was about to change. The atmosphere at the gate shifted slightly, but only for a moment. The guards were still laughing, still enjoying the idea that the man standing in front of them could possibly believe he belonged inside such a high-level estate. To them, it was just another attempt, another random visitor trying to create a story. The first guard stepped forward a little more, his tone now sharper. "Listen carefully," he said. "We deal with people like you all the time. Claiming things. Making up stories. Trying to bluff your way in." The second guard crossed his arms and nodded. "This isn't a public place. It's private. Highly secured. Even important people need clearance." The man remained still. No reaction. No irritation. No attempt to defend himself. Just silence. Steven Seagal. That calmness, however, only irritated the guards more. The first guard leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice as if talking to someone who didn't understand reality. "Do you even realize where you are standing right now? This property belongs to extremely powerful people, not random visitors." A short pause followed. Still no response. The second guard smirked again. "Honestly, I think you should leave before this becomes embarrassing for you." But instead of leaving, the man finally shifted his weight slightly. His eyes moved from the guards to the long driveway behind them, and then toward the main mansion visible in the distance. For the first time, he spoke again. "I already told you," he said calmly. "I'm not a visitor." The guards exchanged another look. This time, the amusement started turning into mild irritation. The first guard let out a short breath. "All right then," he said, reaching for his radio. "Let's just end this nonsense." But before he could press the button, the man slowly reached into his pocket. The movement was calm, deliberate, controlled. Both guards immediately focused on his hand. "Hey, stop right there," the second guard warned quickly. The man didn't stop. Instead, he pulled out a phone. Not a weapon. Not anything suspicious. Just a simple phone. He looked at it for a second, then made a call. The guards relaxed slightly again, thinking it was just another pointless attempt to create drama. The first guard even smirked. "What now?" calling someone to prove your imaginary story. But then something changed. The man's voice was low, calm, and direct. "I'm at the gate," he said. A pause. Then only 3 more words. "Send someone now." That was it. The call ended. No explanation. No argument. No emotion. The phone went back into his pocket. For the first time, the guards didn't laugh immediately. There was a short silence. A strange kind of silence that didn't match the sunny afternoon around them. The second guard frowned slightly. "Who do you think he called?" he asked quietly. The first guard shrugged, trying to stay confident. "Probably some fake assistant or friend. Doesn't matter." But even as he said it, his tone wasn't as strong as before. Because something about the man's confidence didn't feel normal anymore. And then, far down the long driveway, a distant engine sound began to rise. Both guards turned their heads slowly. The laughter was gone now. And for the first time, they weren't so sure anymore. What do you think is coming next? Help or trouble? Comment next if you want part 3. The moment the guards heard the distant engine sound, everything changed. At first, it was faint, just a low hum rolling through the long private driveway. But within seconds, that sound grew louder, heavier, more controlled, like multiple vehicles moving in perfect coordination. The first guard straightened his posture without even realizing it. "What is that?" he muttered. The second guard tried to stay calm, but his eyes were already scanning the road ahead. "It's probably staff vehicles," he said quickly. "Relax." But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Steven Seagal still stood exactly where he had been since the beginning. No movement. No reaction. Just calm silence. But now, that silence felt different. It wasn't normal anymore. It felt like waiting. The engine sound got closer. And then, 3 black luxury SUVs appeared at the far end of the driveway, slowly moving in formation. The guard's confidence started to fade. The first guard adjusted his uniform. "Okay, maybe someone important is visiting," he said quietly. The second guard nodded but didn't speak. The SUVs continued forward until they reached the gate. And then they stopped. Perfect alignment. Perfect timing. A second of silence followed. Then the middle vehicle door opened. A man stepped out. He was dressed formally. Expensive suit. Controlled movements. A man used to authority. He looked around once, then immediately locked eyes with Steven. And in that exact moment, his expression changed. Confusion first. Then shock. Then disbelief. He didn't move for a few seconds. Just stared. The guards noticed it immediately. The first guard whispered, "Why is he looking at him like that?" The second guard didn't answer. Because now even he felt it. Something was wrong. The man from the car slowly started walking toward the gate. His steps were fast but controlled, like someone trying not to panic in public. As he got closer, the atmosphere grew heavier. The birds sounded quieter. Even the wind felt like it had slowed down. He stopped right in front of Steven. A long pause. Then finally, he spoke in a low voice. "Sir." That single word changed everything. The guards froze. "Sir." Why would someone like him say that? The man in the suit turned slightly toward the guards, his face now serious. "Do you know who you've stopped?" he asked sharply. The guards didn't respond. The first guard tried to speak, but no sound came out. The second guard swallowed hard. The man in the suit shook his head slowly. "This is not a visitor." He paused. "This is the owner of this property." Silence hit like a wave. The guards looked at each other instantly. Confusion. Shock. Denial. The first guard finally spoke, his voice weaker now. "Owner." The man in the suit nodded. "And not just this estate." He glanced back at Steven. "Most of this entire area reports to him." A long silence followed. The guards' faces slowly changed. The confidence was gone. The laughter was gone. Everything they believed just moments ago collapsed. And Steven still hadn't said a word. He just stood there, calm, unmoved. Like none of this was new to him at all. The man in the suit lowered his head slightly, as if realizing the seriousness of the situation. The guards were no longer standing proudly at a gate. They were standing in front of a mistake they could not undo. And the worst part? The real realization had not even fully hit them yet. Because what comes next will break their understanding completely. The silence at the gate was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, uncomfortable, almost suffocating. The guards stood completely still, as if their bodies had forgotten how to move. Just moments ago, they were laughing, confident, and in control. Now they were staring at the ground, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The man in the suit had already said enough. But somehow, the worst part was still sinking in. Steven Seagal remained in the same position. Calm. Straight posture. Hands relaxed. No expression of anger. No satisfaction. No reaction at all. That silence itself was more powerful than any words. The senior officer in the suit took a slow breath and looked at the guards again. His voice dropped, but it carried authority. "You didn't just stop a random man," he said. A pause. "You stopped someone who built this place." The first guard's throat tightened. The second guard blinked rapidly, trying to process what he just heard. The first guard finally spoke, his voice weak. We thought he was lying." The officer immediately cut him off. "That's the problem." He stepped closer. "You assumed. You mocked. You didn't verify." A long pause followed. The guards had no defense anymore. No joke. No smirk. No confidence. Just silence. The officer turned slightly toward Steven, lowering his head a fraction. Even he looked humbled now. Then he turned back to the guards. "Do you understand what kind of situation you've created?" Neither guard answered. Because the answer was obvious. They didn't. Not fully. The officer continued. "This man doesn't need permission to enter here." He paused again. "He is the reason this gate exists in the first place." The words landed like a shockwave. One of the guards finally looked up. His eyes were shaking. "Sir, we didn't know," he said quietly. The officer exhaled sharply. "That's not an excuse." A brief silence followed. The wind moved gently across the driveway, but no one felt it. Everything felt frozen. Then something unexpected happened. Steven finally moved. Just a small step forward. Nothing dramatic. No anger. No aggression. But that single step made everyone instinctively hold their breath. The guards immediately tensed again. But he didn't look at them. Not even once. Instead, he looked past them, toward the open gate, toward the property he already owned. And then, in a calm voice, he spoke for the first time since the beginning. "It's fine." 2 words. That's all. The guards looked up instantly, confused. "Sir," one of them whispered. But Steven didn't repeat himself. He simply continued walking. The officer quickly stepped aside. Respectfully. Without hesitation. The guards instinctively moved out of the way too, almost like their bodies were reacting before their minds could catch up. As Steven walked past them, there was no anger in his presence. Only quiet authority. Only control. The first guard lowered his head fully now. The second guard clenched his jaw, struggling with embarrassment. Neither could look at him. Because now they understood something important. The man they mocked wasn't trying to prove anything. He never needed to. And the worst part of their mistake was not what they said. It was how confidently they said it. As Steven continued walking deeper into the estate, the officer turned slightly toward the guards and spoke one final warning. "Let this be the last time you judge someone by appearance." The guards didn't respond. They couldn't. Because at that moment, they were not just guards anymore. They were a lesson in real time. And the realization had finally fully arrived. Too late. The atmosphere slowly began to settle after the revelation, but nothing felt normal anymore. The guards were still standing at the same gate, but it felt like they were standing in a completely different world now. The same sunlight, the same mansion, the same road. Yet everything looked heavier, quieter, and far more serious than before. The man they had laughed at was now walking inside the estate without hesitation. Steven Seagal moved with complete calm. No rush. No pride. No need to look back. Just steady steps forward, as if the entire situation was never worth reacting to in the first place. Behind him, the senior officer in the suit stood still for a moment, watching carefully. Then he turned toward the guards. His expression had changed now. Not angry, but disappointed. Deeply disappointed. "You both don't understand what just happened here," he said quietly. The first guard swallowed hard. The second guard avoided eye contact completely. The officer continued. "This wasn't just a mistake." A pause. "This was disrespect." The words hit harder than shouting would have. The first guard finally spoke, voice low. "Sir, we thought we were just doing our job." The officer shook his head immediately. "No." He stepped closer. "You were not doing your job." Another pause. "You were protecting your ego." Silence followed again. The sound of distant birds returned, but it felt distant and meaningless in comparison to what was unfolding in front of them. The officer exhaled slowly and looked toward the mansion. "Do you know why he didn't argue with you?" he asked. The guards stayed silent. Because they didn't have an answer. The officer answered himself. Because people at that level don't argue to prove identity. He turned back to them. They observe. They wait. And when the time comes, reality corrects itself. The words stayed in the air for a moment. Heavy. Unforgettable. The first guard finally spoke again, softer this time. "Sir, is there anything we can do now?" The officer looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, but with finality. "Yes," he said. A pause. "Learn." Nothing more. No punishment announced. No shouting. No dramatic consequences. Just a single word. Learn. At that moment, Steven had already walked farther into the estate. The gates behind him slowly began to close again. But this time, they didn't feel like barriers. They felt like protection. A symbol of authority that the guards had failed to understand earlier. The second guard finally broke his silence. "He didn't even look angry," he said quietly. The first guard nodded slowly. "That's what makes it worse." Because they both realized something important now. The strongest reaction they expected never came. No anger. No revenge. No humiliation. Only silence. And that silence was louder than anything they had ever experienced in their lives. The officer adjusted his suit and prepared to leave, but before stepping away, he turned one last time. "This is not just about him," he said. A pause. "It's about how quickly you judged someone without knowing a single truth." The guard stood quietly, absorbing every word. The officer walked toward his vehicle. But just before getting in, he added one final line without turning back. "The most powerful people in the world don't announce their power. They simply let reality do it for them." Then he left. The driveway slowly became quiet again. The guards remained at the gate. Not speaking. Not moving. Just thinking. Trying to understand how a normal-looking afternoon turned into something they would remember for the rest of their lives. The sun was still shining. The mansion still stood tall. But for them, everything had changed. Because now they knew. Respect is not something you assume. It's something you learn. Sometimes the hard way. And inside the estate, Steven continued walking forward without looking back even once. Not because he didn't care, but because he never needed to prove that he mattered. What would you have done in the guard's place? Comment, humble, if you learned something from this. The afternoon sun was still bright, but the mood at the gate had completely changed. Everything looked the same from the outside. The tall iron gate, the long driveway, the perfectly maintained lawn. But for the two security guards, nothing felt familiar anymore. They stood there quietly, barely moving, as if even small actions required effort now. No jokes. No smirks. No confidence. Just silence. Inside the estate, the man they had disrespected was already gone from sight. Steven Seagal walked deeper into the property without turning back. His presence had not changed, but their perception of him had shattered completely. Behind the guards, the senior officer had already left. His final words still echoed in their minds. Learn. That single word felt heavier than any punishment. The first guard finally broke the silence. His voice was low. Did we really just stop him like that? The second guard didn't answer immediately. He stared at the ground, replaying everything in his mind. The laughter. The sarcasm. The confidence. Slowly, he nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. Then added, we did. Another silence followed. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. The first guard rubbed his forehead, struggling to process it all. I thought he was bluffing, he admitted. The second guard let out a short breath. We both did. A pause. And that's the problem. They both stood there for a moment, not speaking. The wind moved gently across the driveway, but even nature felt distant now. The second guard finally spoke again. Have you ever seen someone that calm, even after being disrespected like that? The first guard slowly shook his head. No. That was the truth. Because what disturbed them the most wasn't the correction. It was the reaction. Or rather, the lack of it. No anger. No frustration. No attempt to prove anything. Just control. Absolute control. The first guard looked up slightly toward the mansion. He didn't even raise his voice, he said. The second guard nodded. That's what power actually looks like. A long pause followed. The words hit differently now. Because earlier, they had mistaken silence for weakness. But now, they understood it was the opposite. The first guard leaned slightly against the gate pillar, suddenly looking exhausted. Do you think he's angry with us? He asked quietly. The second guard thought for a moment before answering. If he was angry, he said slowly, we would already know. That line stayed in the air. Heavy. True. And unsettling. Because deep down, both of them realized something important. They weren't punished. They weren't yelled at. They weren't even corrected directly by him. Instead, they were shown reality. And reality was enough. The first guard looked at his hands. They felt the same. But everything about him felt different now. I keep thinking about what I said to him, he admitted. The second guard nodded. Me too. Another pause. Then he added quietly, we didn't just disrespect a man. We disrespected someone who didn't even need to prove himself. That was the part that hurt the most. Because arrogance can sometimes be corrected with consequences. But ignorance, once exposed, stays with you. A light sound came from inside the estate. Some movement, maybe staff or a vehicle, but neither guard turned to look anymore. Their focus wasn't outside now. It was inward. The first guard finally spoke again. If I had known who he was, I would never have spoken like that. The second guard looked at him. That's exactly the point, he said. A pause. It shouldn't take knowing who someone is to show respect. The words settled deeply. Neither of them responded. Because there was nothing left to argue with. The truth had already taken over. After a long silence, the first guard exhaled slowly. What do we do now? He asked. The second guard looked ahead at the gate. At the place where everything had started. Then he answered quietly. We do our job, but differently. The first guard frowned slightly. How? The second guard paused. Without assuming. Another silence. This one felt final. Not heavy anymore, but grounding. They both stood straighter now, not because they had regained confidence, but because they had regained awareness. Inside the estate, Steven was no longer visible. But his presence remained everywhere. Not as authority. Not as fear. But as a lesson that had permanently reshaped their thinking. And for the first time since the morning started, the guards were no longer laughing. No longer judging. Just learning. The heat of the afternoon had slowly started to soften. Golden sunlight spread across the long driveway, casting calm shadows from the tall gates and perfectly trimmed trees. On the surface, everything looked peaceful again, like nothing had happened. But for the two security guards standing at the entrance, Nothing inside them felt peaceful anymore. They were no longer the same people who had laughed earlier that day. They were quieter now. More careful. More aware. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was thoughtful. Inside the estate, the man they had judged without hesitation was already gone from sight. Steven Seagal had moved deeper into the property without ever looking back. Not because he didn't notice what happened, but because he didn't need to carry it with him. That realization alone weighed heavily on the guards. The first guard finally spoke, breaking the long silence. "Do you think he'll ever report us?" he asked quietly. The second guard didn't answer immediately. He kept staring at the gate. After a long pause, he shook his head slowly. "No," he said. The first guard frowned. "How do you know?" The second guard took a deep breath. "People like that don't waste energy on revenge," he replied. "They don't need it." A silence followed. The first guard nodded slowly, but his expression was still heavy. "That's what makes it worse," he admitted. The second guard looked at him. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Because it means the punishment already happened." Neither of them spoke after that, because they both understood what he meant. The humiliation they feared never came in the form they expected. No shouting. No complaints. No confrontation. Instead, it came in the form of realization. The first guard leaned slightly against the gate, exhaling slowly. "I keep replaying it," he said. "Every word I said." The second guard nodded. "Same." A pause. Then he added softly, "And the worst part is, he didn't even react." That sentence stayed in the air. Heavy. Unforgiving. Because it was true. They had expected anger. They had expected ego. They had expected drama. But what they received instead was silence. And silence, they now realized, was far more powerful. The first guard looked down at his uniform. "This job. I thought it was about authority," he said quietly. The second guard turned slightly toward him. "It is," he replied. Then after a pause, "But not the kind we thought." A long silence followed again. The wind moved gently across the open space, brushing past the gate and carrying the sounds of distant city life. The second guard straightened his posture slightly. "Do you know what I learned today?" he asked. The first guard looked at him. "What?" The second guard hesitated for a moment. "Respect isn't about who stands in front of you," he said slowly. "It's about how quickly you decide their worth." The first guard didn't respond, because the truth of that statement was already sinking in too deeply. After a moment, footsteps could be heard from inside the estate, staff moving, distant activity returning to normal. But for the guards, nothing felt normal anymore. The first guard finally spoke again. "I feel like I failed," he said. The second guard looked at him. "We didn't fail at the job," he said quietly. A pause. "We failed at judgment." That difference mattered. Because one could be corrected. The other had to be understood. The sun was now slightly lower, casting longer shadows across the driveway. The gate stood still. Immovable. Like a reminder of everything that had happened. The first guard looked up one last time toward the mansion. "He didn't say a single harsh word to us," he said. The second guard nodded. "That's what I can't forget." A pause. "Because it shows who was actually in control the entire time." The first guard took a deep breath. "I used to think power was loud," he admitted. The second guard gave a small, almost sad smile. "Me too." Another silence followed. This one felt final. Not painful anymore, but understanding. After a few moments, the second guard adjusted his uniform properly for the first time since morning. Then he looked at the gate with a different expression now. More respectful, more serious. "We should do this differently from now on," he said. The first guard nodded. "Yeah." No arguments. No jokes. Just agreement. Because something inside them had permanently shifted. The man they had underestimated was gone now. But the lesson he left behind was not. Inside the estate, life continued as if nothing had happened. But outside the gate, two people had changed forever. Not because they were punished, but because they finally understood something simple. That real power does not need attention. It only needs time. And truth always reveals itself, even without words. As the afternoon slowly turned golden, the guards stood in silence one last time. Not as arrogant gatekeepers, but as learners of a lesson they would never forget. And somewhere deep inside the estate, Steven continued his day, without needing to look back even once. What would you have learned from this situation? Comment, lesson learned, if this story hit you emotionally.